If you search on YouTube for Joan Laporta, you'll see dozens of videos stating the same narrative, the comeback story, the man who saved Barcelona twice. Laporta, the charismatic leader who brought Barcelona back from the brink, the man who restored the brand, the style, the victories. And that's fair, credit where it's due. After all, he's the man who helped define Barcelona's golden age. Ronaldinho, the Guardiola era, the rise of Messi, and the historic treble. So when he returned in 2021, it felt like a homecoming, like the beginning of a rescue story. But when you look past the public statements and media buzz, a very different reality emerges. Barcelona might be winning trophies again, but financially and institutionally, the club is not yet healed, because behind the silverware, the statements, and the optimism, something far more concerning is quietly being kept from the fans. To understand Laporta's second term at Barcelona, we first need to acknowledge the state of the club he inherited when he returned. The former president, Josep Maria Bartomeu, left Barcelona in ruin. The club was burdened with inflated contracts, a wage bill that outpaced revenue, and hundreds of millions owed in deferred payments. Financially, Barcelona was stretched to its limit. Laporta built his campaign around these crises, making it clear to supporters that keeping Messi was at the center of his vision. Over and over, in public appearances and private meetings, he maintained that he was the only one who could secure Messi's renewal. However, by the summer of 2021, it became evident that the financial realities would not support this promise. With no room under La Liga's salary cap, keeping Messi would require either a massive offloading of wages or accepting the CVC deal proposed by La Liga, an agreement Laporta rejected on ideological grounds. Instead of preparing the fans for this outcome, he maintained optimism until the very last moment. And when the deal collapsed, Laporta framed it publicly as a sudden discovery, claiming financial constraints were unexpectedly insurmountable. But that wasn't the truth. He already had access to the club's audited financial numbers as early as April 2021. The timing of Messi's departure announcement was not coincidental. It occurred just as Laporta prepared to activate what he termed economic levers. These were essentially one-time asset sales portrayed as strategic moves, but in reality, they were just stopgap liquidity operations, selling 25% of Barca's TV rights for 25 years and liquidating portions of Barca studios. These transactions were booked as ordinary revenue rather than exceptional gains, a financial maneuver UEFA would later sanction. Despite that, these operations helped fund a high-profile summer of signings like Lewandowski, Koundé, and Rafinha, enabling Laporta to claim that the club had turned a financial corner. It was a classic move commonly employed by state politicians. Promise something popular, in this case, Messi's renewal, to win the election, then pivot afterward to activate economic levers to bring in new lower-wage players. However, the club's core structural problems persisted. Revenues remained inflated, expenses unsustainable, and the wage-to-income ratio exceeded UEFA's recommended thresholds. Following Messi's exit, Erling Haaland emerged as the next fantasy signing. Laporta allowed media speculation to suggest negotiations were advanced. He was photographed meeting with Haaland's then-agent Mino Raiola and his father Alf-Inge Haaland during their visit to Barcelona. The images circulated publicly, heightening expectations. Yet internally, the financial department knew the deal was financially impossible. No formal offer was made. And when Haaland eventually joined Manchester City, Laporta quietly moved on, avoiding any explanation of how the transfer saga really unfolded. In early 2024, tensions in the dugout became public when then-coach Xavi Hernandez announced his intention to step down, citing exhaustion and the constant challenge of managing expectations amid the club's ongoing financial instability. Laporta persuaded him to stay, presenting Xavi's reversal as a show of unity and continuity for the project. But just a few months later, Xavi spoke openly about Barcelona's financial limitations, admitting that the club could not realistically compete with Europe's elite under the current conditions. Soon after that, Laporta dismissed him, making it clear that speaking openly about the club's financial challenges was not tolerated. During the 24-25 season, Barcelona's registration challenges only deepened. Dani Olmo, who had signed earlier, and Pau Victor were both still awaiting official registration. These delays were not due to administrative complications, but to the club's inability to meet La Liga's financial requirements. La Liga demanded proof of 100 million euros in new revenue before authorizing new registrations. Revenue Laporta claimed would come from the sale of VIP boxes at the renovated Camp Nou. In reality, this income had not been collected or validated by the deadline, so La Liga blocked the registrations. Barcelona appealed and secured temporary registration for the players, but the underlying problem persisted. During the summer transfer of 2024, Laporta followed a familiar pattern with Nico Williams. Reports from inside the club and the media suggested that a deal was close, with Laporta publicly describing Nico as central to Barcelona's future sporting project. However, despite the optimism, there was no viable registration plan submitted to La Liga. Without major player departures, Barcelona simply lacked the financial margin to add significant new salaries. Eventually, the transfer failed. Still, Laporta downplayed the failure and even continued to suggest that a transfer was possible in the future. Fast forward to 2025, and Laporta once again pushed to bring in Nico, but the situation hadn't changed. The club still faced unresolved registration problems, and Nico, aware that there were no guarantees he could be registered, chose to renew with Athletic Club until 2035. This pattern of premature announcements and unmet conditions had become institutionalized. Barcelona made a habit of communicating intentions before the necessary financial groundwork was ever in place. Throughout this period, Laporta repeatedly assured supporters that Barcelona had returned to operating under La Liga's 1-to-1 rule. In theory, this rule allows the club to spend €1 for every euro it earns or saves, suggesting a return to normal financial health and flexibility in the transfer market. In practice, however, the policy only applies under specific conditions that Barcelona had yet to fulfill. Deferred payments, off-balance sheet liabilities, and speculative income projections still weighed heavily on the club's finances. With these constraints, signing new players became increasingly difficult. The club is often left with little choice but to pursue loan deals, such as the short-lived move for Rashford, or to turn back to La Masia in search of immediate solutions. There is also the constant effort to redirect attention away from internal failings by blaming external forces. Laporta regularly presented Barca as victims of Tebas, La Liga, referees, or Madrid-based media, even as the underlying issues remained internal and structural. While many Barcelona fans might rightfully feel that figures like Tebas have a particular bias against Laporta, the reality is that the salary cap remained restrictive only because the club continued to operate at its financial limits. Meanwhile, the Espai Barca megaproject has been plagued by delays and rising costs. The stadium was supposed to partially reopen in late 2024, but after the club failed to secure the occupation license from the city council, those plans were postponed. In June, the club released a promotional video and announced that the team would return to Spotify Camp Nou on August 10, 2025 for the Gamper Trophy. But as the date approached, unresolved safety and construction issues forced the club to cancel the event at the stadium. Now, new projections estimate that the full reopening will not happen before mid-2026, and even the partial return planned for the 25-26 season is expected to be at reduced capacity, with key areas like the roof and VIP ring still unfinished. These ongoing delays have cut off vital revenue from match days and hospitality, adding more pressure to the club's finances, making player registrations and spending even more difficult. It's fair to say that Laporta didn't create the crisis at Barcelona, but he did create the illusion that it had been solved. Rather than true structural reform, his strategy has relied on selling future assets and depending on revenues that remain uncertain. This strategy has allowed Barcelona to maintain appearances, but the consequences have become harder to ignore. While Hansi Flick's arrival and the rise of another generation from La Masia, along with the addition of key players, have brought short-term stability and results, these successes rest on a fragile foundation. As long as Laporta continues to manage the present with temporary solutions, Barcelona's long-term future will remain uncertain, regardless of the optimism or trophies that appear in the short term.